Before I White. Book 2 of the Cos I White series. Part 1. The Weight of Blood. Chapter 1. The House on the Hill. The house on the hill was a monument to everything Ruth Harrison had been taught to despise, even as she had called it home for the first 18 years of her life. It sat atop the highest ridge in Harrison County, Mississippi, a sprawling white colonial with columned porches and tall windows that caught the morning sun like mirrors and reflected it back into the world as a warning to anyone who dared approach. The grounds were immaculate, rolling lawns of emerald grass that had been trimmed by the hands of men who had never owned a single blade of it, ancient oaks draped in Spanish moss that swayed like ghostly curtains in the summer breeze, gardens that bloomed with azaleas and camellias and roses in their proper seasons, each flower planted precisely where it belonged. Each petal a testament to the order that the Harrison family had imposed upon the world around them. It was the kind of house that appeared on postcards, the kind of house that people pointed to with pride when they spoke of the old families, the ones who had built this part of the South with their own hands and their own money and their own unshakable belief in their own superiority. It was the kind of house that whispered secrets, that held memories, that bore witness to the rise and fall of generations. And it was the kind of house that Ruth had fled in the dead of night, never to return. She had grown up in their house, had run through its halls as a child, her bare feet slapping against the polished hardwood floors, her laughter echoing off the high ceilings. She had sat at the long mahogany dining table, learning which fork to use for which course, learning how to speak to the help, learning how to be a proper Southern lady. She had attended the finest schools, worn the finest clothes, and been promised a future that would be just as fine as her past. But all of that had ended the day she told her father she was pregnant. The memory of that day was burned into her mind like a brand, a moment of such searing pain that she had never been able to fully escape it. She had stood in her father's study, her hands clasped together to keep them from trembling, her eyes fixed on the Persian rug beneath her feet, the intricate patterns blurring as tears filled her eyes. Her father, William Harrison III, had sat behind his massive oak desk, his face a mask of cold fury, his eyes hard as flint, his jaw set in the rigid line that she had learned to fear as a child. His mother, Eleanor, had stood by the window, her back turned, her shoulders rigid with disapproval, her silhouette a perfect portrait of aristocratic disdain. "You've disgraced this family," her father had said, his voice low and dangerous, each word cutting into her like a blade. "You've thrown away everything we've given you. Everything we've worked for. For what? For some nobody from the other side of the tracks." Ruth had wanted to defend herself, to explain that the man she loved was not a nobody, that he was kind and gentle and had promised to marry her, that he had a soul as deep and true as any man her father had ever met. But the words had died in her throat. She had seen the look in her father's eyes, and she had known that nothing she could say would make a difference. She had known that he had already judged her, already condemned her, already erased her from the family tree. "Who is he?" her mother had asked, finally turning from the window. Her voice was cold, dismissive, the voice of a woman who had long ago stopped believing that her daughter was capable of anything worthwhile. "Who is the father of this child?" Ruth had shaken her head. "I can't tell you." "Can't, or won't?" her father had demanded, his voice rising, his face flushing with anger. "Both," she had whispered. The truth was that she had promised to protect him. He was a good man, a decent man, but he was also a man with secrets, a man who had trusted her with those secrets and asked her to keep them safe. She had loved him, and she had kept her promise. She had loved him the way she had never loved anyone before, with a fierceness that frightened her, a devotion that defied all reason. And she had believed, with all her heart, that he would come back for her, that he would find a way to be with her, that their love would conquer everything. But her father had not been moved by love. He had been moved by rage, by pride, by the cold calculation of a man who had built his life on appearances and was not about to let his daughter destroy it all. Her father had given her an ultimatum. Either she would name the father, or she would leave the house and never return. She had refused, and he had made good on his threat. Within hours, she had been packed and turned out, her belongings thrown into a single suitcase, her future erased as if it had never existed. She had stood on the steps of the house that had been her home, clutching her suitcase, watching the door close behind her. She had heard the click of the lock, the finality of it, and she had known that she was truly alone. Her mother had not come to say goodbye. Her father had not looked back. She had been cast out like a stranger who had once been their daughter. The years that followed had been hard, harder than she could have ever imagined. Ruth had found work where she could, cleaning houses and waiting tables and doing whatever was necessary to survive. She had moved from town to town, always one step ahead of the shame that seemed to follow her like a shadow, always looking over her shoulder, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. She had given birth to her son, William, in a small hospital in a town she barely remembered, a place called Hattiesburg, where the nurses had been kind and the doctors had been indifferent. She had held him in her arms, this tiny creature with his pale hair and his winter blue eyes, and she had promised herself that she would give him a better life than she had had. She had promised herself that he would never know the pain of rejection, the sting of shame, the cold emptiness of being cast out by those who were supposed to love him. She had named him William after her father, not because she loved her father, she didn't, not anymore, but because she wanted her son to have a name that meant something, a name that carried weight, a name that would open doors rather than close them. She had hoped, naively, that the name would protect him, that it would give him a chance at the life she had never been able to have. But promises, she had learned, were easier made than kept. Now, 8 years later, she stood at the edge of a different town, a small place called Willow Creek, holding her son's hand and wondering if she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. The Greyhound bus that had brought them here had long since disappeared, its diesel fumes dissipating into the cold winter air, its rattle and hum fading into the distance. The sun was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, casting long shadows across the frozen ground. "Where are we going, Mama?" William asked, his voice small and tired, his small hand clutching hers so tightly that his knuckles were white. Ruth looked down at her son, at his pale hair and his winter blue eyes, at the face that was so much like his father's. She felt a surge of love so powerful it almost brought her to her knees, a love that was fierce and protective and all-consuming. This boy was her whole world, her reason for living, her only source of hope in a world that had given her nothing but pain. "Just a little further, baby," she said, squeezing his hand. Just a little further. She had heard about this town from a woman she had met on the bus, a kind old woman with a face like wrinkled parchment and eyes that sparkled with knowing. The woman had told her that Willow Creek was a place where people could start over, a place where the past didn't follow you, a place where you could be whoever you wanted to be. The woman had said it with a knowing look, as if she understood that Ruth was running from something, that Ruth was carrying secrets of her own. Ruth had been too tired, too scared, to ask what the woman meant. She had simply nodded and thanked her and hoped that the woman was right. Now, as she walked through the streets of Willow Creek, she wasn't sure if the woman had been right at all. The town was small, smaller than she had expected, a cluster of buildings that seemed to have been forgotten by time. There was a grocery store with a faded sign, a diner with a flickering neon sign that promised good eats, a barber shop with a red and white pole that hadn't been painted in years, and a church with a white clapboard steeple that rose above the treetops like a silent prayer. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, where secrets were hard to keep, where a woman with a child and no husband would be noticed. She had been running for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to stop. She led William to the edge of town, where the paved road gave way to a dirt track that wound into the dense pine forest. The trees loomed dark and forbidding, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, their shadows stretching across the path like warnings. She knew what she had to do, had known it for weeks, had been planning it and dreading it in equal measure. It was the only way, the only chance she could give her son. "William," she said, kneeling down in front of him, her hands gripping his thin shoulders with a ferocity that surprised them both. "I need you to listen to me." He looked at her, his eyes wide with trust, his small face pale and frightened. He was so small, so fragile, so utterly dependent on her. And she was about to break his heart. "I have to go away for a while," she said, forcing the words out, each one a knife in her chest. "I have to go away, and you need to stay here." His face crumpled, his lower lip trembling, tears welling in his beautiful blue eyes. "No, Mama. Don't leave me. Please don't leave me." She pulled him into a fierce embrace, her body shaking with silent sobs, her tears soaking into his thin coat. "I have no choice," she whispered into his hair. "I have to protect you. They're looking for us. They'll take you away from me if they find us. This is the only way. You stay here, and someone will find you. Someone will take care of you. You're a good boy, William. A good, brave boy. Remember that. Remember me." She pressed a kiss to his forehead, her lips cold and chapped, her heart breaking into 1,000 pieces. Then, before she could lose her nerve, she stood up and ran. She ran into the forest, her thin coat flapping behind her like the wings of a wounded bird, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her legs pumping beneath her as if she could outrun the pain. She did not look back. She couldn't. If she looked back, she would lose her nerve, and she needed to be brave. For him. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave out, and then she collapsed against the trunk of a pine tree and wept. She wept for the life she had lost, for the child she had left behind, for the future she would never have. She wept for the mother she had been and the mother she could not be. She wept until there were no tears left, until her body was empty and hollow, until all that remained was a profound, aching silence. And when the tears were gone, she stood up, wiped her face, and began to walk. She had no idea where she was going, no idea what she would do next. All she knew was that she had done the only thing she could do. She had given her son a chance. Chapter 2. A Mother's Love. Ruth Harrison had been born on a Tuesday in late September, the only daughter of William Harrison III and Eleanor Harrison. She had arrived in the world with a full head of dark hair and a set of lungs that announced her presence to everyone in the hospital. Her father had held her in his arms and declared her perfect, and from that moment on, she had been the center of his world. Her early years had been idyllic, a blur of sunshine and laughter and the kind of privileged existence that few people could imagine. She had wanted for nothing. There had been toys and clothes, tutors and ponies, parties and holidays. She had been surrounded by love and attention, and she had grown up believing that the world was a place of limitless possibility, that the future was hers for the taking. Her mother had been a distant figure, more concerned with appearances than with affection, a woman who seemed to view her daughter as a project rather than a person. Eleanor Harrison had been raised to believe that a woman's value lay in her beauty, her poise, her ability to attract a suitable husband. She had passed these beliefs on to her daughter, not through words, but through the weight of her expectations, the coldness of her gaze, the constant, unspoken demand that Ruth be perfect. But her father had more than made up for it. He had been her champion, her protector, her biggest cheerleader. He had taught her to ride a bike, to read, to stand up for herself. He had told her that she could be anything she wanted to be, that the world was hers for the taking. He had believed in her, truly believed in her, and his belief had given her the confidence to dream. But as she grew older, the world began to narrow. She learned that there were limits, expectations, rules that she was expected to follow. She learned that being a Harrison meant something, that she had a reputation to uphold, a legacy to protect. She learned that there were certain things she could do and certain things she could not, and that deviating from the path that had been laid out for her would have consequences. She had tried to be good. She had tried to be the daughter her parents wanted. She had gone to the right schools, made the right friends, said the right things. She had smiled when she was supposed to smile and been quiet when she was supposed to be quiet. She had been the perfect Southern lady, the belle of every ball. But she had also been lonely. Beneath the surface of her perfect life, there had been a deep, abiding loneliness, a sense that something was missing. She had felt like an actress playing a role, always performing, never being herself. She had felt like a stranger in her own life, watching it unfold from a distance, never quite able to step into it. And then she had met him. He was a stranger to Harrison County, a man who had arrived in town with nothing but a suitcase and a smile. He had been hired to work on the railroad, a temporary job that had brought him through the area. He was handsome in a rugged, unpolished way, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and blue eyes that seemed to see right through her, that seemed to understand her in a way no one else ever had. They had met at the general store, where she had gone to buy some ribbon for her mother. He had been standing in line behind her, and he had helped her pick up the package she had dropped. Their hands had touched, and she had felt a spark, a connection that had taken her breath away. It had been like lightning, sudden and electric, a jolt of recognition that had left her stunned. He had introduced himself as James, and they had started talking. They had talked for hours, standing in the middle of the store, oblivious to the world around them. He had made her laugh, really laugh, for the first time in years. He had made her feel seen, understood, alive. He had looked at her as if she were the most fascinating person in the world, as if everything she said was worth listening to. They had started seeing each other in secret. She knew it was wrong, knew that her parents would never approve, but she couldn't help herself. He was the first person who had ever made her feel like herself, the first person who had ever loved her for who she really was. With him, she could let down her guard, drop the mask, be the person she had always been beneath the surface. She had fallen in love with him, deeply and completely. She had believed that he felt the same way, that they would find a way to be together, that love would conquer all. She had believed that they were meant to be, that fate had brought them together, that nothing could tear them apart. But love, she learned, was not always enough. He had told her the truth one night, sitting on the banks of the creek where they had first kissed. The moon had been full, casting silver light across the water, and the air had been thick with the sound of crickets and the scent of honeysuckle. He had been quiet for a long time, staring at the water, his face pale and troubled, and she had known that something was wrong. "I have to leave," he had said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have to leave, and I can't take you with me." She had felt her world shatter. "Why? What's wrong?" He had looked at her then, his blue eyes filled with pain. "There are things about me that I haven't told you," he had said. "Things that would put you in danger. I can't stay here. I can't put you at risk." She had begged him to explain, but he had refused. He had told her that he loved her, that leaving was the hardest thing he had ever had to do, but that it was the only way to keep her safe. He had told her that he would always love her, that he would never forget her, that she had changed his life in ways she couldn't imagine. "When you love someone," he had said, "you have to be willing to let them go." She hadn't understood then. She had been too angry, too hurt, too desperate. She had screamed at him, cried, begged him to stay. She had told him that she didn't care about the danger, that she would rather be with him than be safe, that love was worth the risk. But he had been adamant. He had held her tightly, kissed her forehead, and walked away into the darkness. She had watched him go, her heart breaking into 1,000 pieces, and she had never seen him again. She had told him she was pregnant before he left. He had held her tightly, his body shaking with silent sobs. He had begged her to forgive him, to understand, to take care of herself and their child. He had promised that he would find her, that he would come back for her, that they would be together again. She had believed him. She had believed that he would come back, that they would be together, that everything would work out in the end. She had clung to that belief like a lifeline, a beacon of hope in the darkness. But he never came back. Chapter 3. The Man Who Left. James had been a mystery to Ruth from the very beginning. A man who seemed to carry secrets as naturally as other men carried wallets. He had never spoken about his past, never mentioned his family, never given any indication of where he had come from or what he had left behind. He had been a ghost, a figure who had appeared in her life and disappeared just as quickly. In the weeks after his departure, Ruth had tried to find him. She had asked questions, followed leads, searched through records. She had called every number he had ever given her, written to every address, visited every place he had ever mentioned. But she had found nothing. It was as if he had never existed, as if he had been a figment of her imagination. She had begun to wonder if she had imagined him, if the love she had felt had been a fantasy. But the child growing inside her was proof that he had been real, that the love had been real, that the loss was real. She had written him letters, dozens of them, pouring out her heart on paper. She had told him about the baby, about her fears and hopes, about the future she had dreamed for them. She had told him that she loved him, that she missed him, that she would wait for him forever if she had to. She had sent the letters to the last address she had for him, but they had been returned, unopened. She had kept his photograph, a worn and faded picture of a man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. It was the only thing she had of him, the only proof that he had existed, and she had clung to it like a lifeline. She had looked at it every night, tracing the lines of his face with her finger, trying to remember the sound of his voice, the warmth of his touch. She had named her son after him, in a way. William had been her father's name, but she had given it to her son as a tribute to the man she had loved, the man who had given her the greatest gift of her life. The warning had come in the form of a letter, slipped under her door in the middle of the night. She had found it the next morning, a plain white envelope with no return address, no postmark, nothing to indicate where it had come from. Inside, there had been a single sheet of paper, covered in typewritten words. "You need to leave. They're coming for you. They'll take the child. Run and don't look back." Ruth had read the letter over and over, her heart pounding with fear. She had no idea who had sent it or why. She had no idea what it meant, who they were, why they would want to take a child. But she had also had no doubt that the warning was real. She had seen the look in James's eyes when he had told her he had to leave, the fear that had lurked beneath the surface. She had sensed that he was running from something, that his secrets had put him in danger. And now, it seemed, that danger had found her. She had packed her bags that very night, taking only what she could carry. She had grabbed William from his bed, wrapping him in a blanket, and fled into the darkness. She had no idea where she was going, No idea what she would do next. All she knew was that she had to run, had to protect her son, had to keep him safe. The years that followed were a blur of motel rooms and bus stations, of stolen moments and constant fear. Ruth had moved from town to town, never staying in one place for more than a few weeks, always looking over her shoulder, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. She had worked odd jobs, taken whatever she could find, done whatever was necessary to survive. She had been a waitress, a maid, a factory worker, a seamstress. She had done things she was not proud of, taken risks she would never have taken if she had had any other choice. And all the while, she had been haunted by the fear that they would find her, that they would take her son, that everything she had sacrificed would be for nothing. It was in a small diner in a town she didn't remember that she had met the stranger. He was an old man, his face lined with years of hard living, his eyes sharp and knowing. He had sat down across from her, uninvited, and looked at her with an intensity that had made her blood run cold. "You're the one they're looking for," he had said, his voice low and gravelly. "The one with the boy." She had tried to deny it, to brush him off, to pretend she didn't know what he was talking about. But he had just shaken his head, a sad smile on his lips. "I'm not here to hurt you," he had said. "I'm here to warn you. They're getting closer. They know you're heading south. You need to find a place to hide, a place where no one will find you." He had told her about Willow Creek, a small town in Mississippi where people minded their own business and strangers were welcome. He had told her that the town was mostly black, that she would be an outsider, but that she would be safe. He had told her that there was a church there, a good church, run by a good man who would help her. She had listened to him, her heart pounding with fear and hope. She had wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that there was a place where she could finally stop running, where she and her son could find peace. "Thank you," she had whispered. "Thank you for telling me." He had nodded, his eyes filled with a strange, sad understanding. "You're a good mother," he had said. "You're doing the right thing. Don't ever doubt that." He had stood up and walked away, disappearing into the night, and she had never seen him again. The journey to Willow Creek had been long and hard. Ruth had spent her last few dollars on a bus ticket, cramming herself and William into the back of the Greyhound, holding him close as they rattled through the night. She had not slept, not really, too consumed by fear and exhaustion to find rest. William had been a trooper, as he always was. He had not complained, not once, even though she knew he was tired and hungry and scared. He had just curled up against her, his small body warm against hers, his trust in her absolute. She had looked down at him, at his pale hair and his winter blue eyes, at the face that was so much like his father's. She had felt a surge of love so powerful it had almost broken her, a love that was fierce and protective and all-consuming. This boy was her whole world, her reason for living, her only source of hope in a world that had given her nothing but pain. "Don't worry, baby," she had whispered. "I'm going to find us a home. I'm going to take care of you. I promise." The bus had pulled into Willow Creek in the early morning, the sky still dark, the air cold and biting. Ruth had stepped off the bus, William's hand in hers, and looked around at the town that would become her son's home. It was small, smaller than she had expected, a cluster of buildings that seemed to have been forgotten by time. There was a grocery store with a faded sign, a diner with a flickering neon sign that promised good eats, a barber shop with a red and white pole that hadn't been painted in years, and a church with a white clapboard steeple that rose above the treetops like a silent prayer. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, where secrets were hard to keep, where a woman with a child and no husband would be noticed. But it was also the kind of place where people could start over, where the past didn't follow you, where you could be whoever you wanted to be. She had walked through the streets, William's hand in hers, her heart pounding with fear and hope. She had seen the people, the black men and women going about their business, the children playing in the streets. She had seen the way they looked at her, a white woman with a white child, an anomaly, an outsider. She had known, in that moment, that she could not stay. She could not bring her son here, could not expose him to the prejudice and discrimination that she knew he would face. She could not force him to live in a world that would hate him simply because of the color of his skin. She had made her choice. She would leave him here, in this town, with these people. She would trust that they would take care of him, that they would give him the chance she could never give him. She had led him to the edge of the forest, to the place where the trees loomed dark and forbidding, and she had told him what she had to do. And then she had run. Chapter 4. The Grandparent Shame. The news of Ruth's pregnancy had spread through Harrison County like wildfire, carried on the tongues of gossips and the whispers of servants. Within days, everyone knew that the Harrison girl had disgraced herself, that she had fallen from grace, that she was carrying a child whose father no one knew. The shame had been unbearable. The Harrison family, once the pride of the county, had become an object of pity and scorn. The invitations had stopped coming. The phone had stopped ringing. The friends who had once filled their house had disappeared, not wanting to be associated with a family that had fallen so far. Her father had retreated into a cold silence, speaking to her only when necessary, his eyes filled with a contempt that cut deeper than any words. Her mother had retreated into her own world, burying herself in her garden, refusing to acknowledge her daughter's existence. The house that had once been filled with laughter had become a tomb, silent and cold. Ruth had tried to make amends. She had apologized, begged for forgiveness, offered to do whatever was necessary to restore the family's honor. But it had been no use. The damage had been done, and her parents had made it clear that there was no coming back from it. The confrontation had come on a Sunday afternoon, after church. Her father had called her into his study, his face a mask of cold fury. Her mother had stood by the window, her back turned, her shoulders rigid with disapproval. "You've disgraced this family," her father had said, his voice low and dangerous. "You've thrown away everything we've given you. Everything we've worked for. For what? For some nobody from the other side of the tracks." Ruth had wanted to defend herself, to explain that the man she loved was not a nobody, that he was kind and gentle and had promised to marry her. But the words had died in her throat. She had seen the look in her father's eyes, and she had known that nothing she could say would make a difference. "Who is he?" her mother had asked, finally turning from the window. Her voice was cold, dismissive, the voice of a woman who had long ago stopped believing that her daughter was capable of anything worthwhile. "I can't tell you," Ruth had whispered. "Can't, or won't?" her father had demanded. "Both." The truth was that she had promised to protect him. He was a good man, a decent man, but he was also a man with secrets, a man who had trusted her with those secrets and asked her to keep them safe. She had loved him, and she had kept her promise. But her father had not been moved by love. He had been moved by rage, by pride, by the cold calculation of a man who had built his life on appearances and was not about to let his daughter destroy it all. "Either you name the father," her father had said, "or you leave this house and never return." She had refused, and he had made good on his threat. The days after her expulsion had been a blur of tears and pain. Ruth had wandered the streets, her suitcase in hand, her heart heavy with grief. She had no place to go, no one to turn to, no hope for the future. She had ended up in a small boarding house on the edge of town, a place where the rooms were cheap and the neighbors were indifferent. She had spent her last few dollars on a room, a tiny space with a bed and a chair and nothing else. She had sat on the bed, her hands empty, her heart broken, and wept. She had thought about her parents, about the life she had lost, about the future she would never have. She had thought about the child growing inside her, the child who would never know his grandparents, the child who would grow up without a family. And she had felt a rage rise up inside her, a rage that was fierce and hot and all-consuming. She had been cast out, discarded, abandoned. She had been treated as if she were nothing, as if her life meant nothing, as if her existence was a crime. But she would not let that rage consume her. She would not let the anger win. She had a child to think about, a child who needed her, a child who deserved a better life than she could give him. William was born on a cold December night, in a small hospital in Hattiesburg. Ruth had been alone, terrified, her body racked with pain. But when she had held her son in her arms, all the pain had melted away. She had looked at his tiny face, at his pale hair and his winter blue eyes, and she had known that she would do anything, absolutely anything, to protect him. She had named him William, after her father. It was a name that carried weight, a name that meant something. She wanted her son to have a chance, to have opportunities, to have a life that was better than hers. She had looked down at him, her heart overflowing with love. "I'm going to take care of you," she had whispered. "I'm going to give you everything I never had. I promise." Chapter 5. The Road Begins. The years that followed were a blur of motel rooms and bus stations, of stolen moments and constant fear. Ruth had moved from town to town, never staying in one place for more than a few weeks, always looking over her shoulder, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. She had worked odd jobs, taken whatever she could find, done whatever was necessary to survive. She had been a waitress, a maid, a factory worker, a seamstress. She had done things she was not proud of, taken risks she would never have taken if she had had any other choice. But through it all, she had kept William safe. She had fed him, clothed him, loved him. She had taught him to read, to write, to dream. She had given him everything she could, even when she had nothing to give. William had grown up on the road, a child with no home, no roots, no sense of belonging. He had learned to adapt, to be quiet, to stay out of sight. He had learned to read people, to know when to trust, to know when to run. But he had also learned to dream. He had dreamed of a home, of a family, of a place where he belonged. He had dreamed of a future where he could be someone, where he could make a difference, where he could be proud of who he was. Ruth had seen that fire in his eyes, that determination, that hunger for something more. And she had known that she had to give him a chance, a real chance, to escape the life that had been forced upon them. The decision to leave William in Willow Creek had been the hardest choice Ruth had ever made. She had agonized over it, prayed over it, cried over it. She had weighed the options, considered the alternatives, tried to find another way. But in the end, she had known that it was the only way. She was running out of money, running out of time, running out of hope. She could not keep William safe forever, could not protect him from the world that was closing in around them. She had to give him a chance. A real chance. A chance to be someone, to do something, to make a difference. She had led him to the edge of the forest, to the place where the trees loomed dark and forbidding, and she had told him what she had to do. And then she had run. Part 2. The Running. Chapter 6. Motel Rooms and Strangers. The years on the road had taught Ruth that there were two kinds of motel rooms in the world, the ones that smelled like bleach and the ones that smelled like despair. The ones that smelled like bleach were the good ones, the ones where the sheets were clean and the water was hot and you could almost pretend that you were a normal person, living a normal life. The ones that smelled like despair were the others, the ones where the sheets were stained and the water was cold and the walls were thin enough to hear the man in the next room crying. Ruth and William had stayed in more motel rooms than she could count, more than she wanted to remember. They had stayed in bright, cheerful ones with swimming pools and vending machines, where the neon signs flickered with promises of comfort and the parking lots were filled with families on vacation. They had stayed in dark, dreary ones with flickering lights and the faint smell of cigarette smoke, where the carpets were stained and the bedspreads were threadbare and the only sounds were the hum of the air conditioner and the distant wail of a train whistle. They had stayed in ones where the doors didn't lock and the windows didn't close and the only thing between them and the outside world was a flimsy curtain and a prayer. But no matter where they stayed, Ruth had always made sure to keep William close. She had slept with him in the same bed, her body curled around his, her arms wrapped around him like a shield. She had kept the photograph of James close, the only thing that reminded her that she had once known love, that she had once been happy, that there had been a time before the running. The photograph was worn and faded now, the edges soft from years of handling. She had looked at it so many times that she could trace every line of his face with her eyes closed, the gentle curve of his smile, the kindness in his eyes, the way his hair fell across his forehead. She had memorized every detail, every shadow, every nuance. It was the only thing she had of him, the only proof that he had existed, that the love had been real. She often wondered where he was, whether he was safe, whether he ever thought about her. She wondered if he was still running, still hiding, still fighting whatever battle had forced him to leave. She wondered if he had found peace, if he had found happiness, if he had found someone else to love. And she wondered if he ever thought about the son he had never known. The motel at the edge of town had been the worst one yet. It was a dirty, dilapidated place, the paint peeling off the walls in long, curling strips, the neon sign flickering in the darkness like a dying heartbeat. The parking lot was filled with potholes and broken glass, and the only light came from a single bulb above the office door, buzzing with the desperate energy of a trapped insect. The man at the front desk had been surly, suspicious, his eyes lingering on William in a way that made Ruth's skin crawl. He was a large man, with a thick neck and a permanent scowl, and he had looked at them as if they were something unpleasant that had tracked mud onto his floor. "One night," he had said, his voice flat and unfriendly. "That's all I can give you." Ruth had paid with the last of her money, her hands trembling, her heart pounding. She had taken William's hand and led him to their room, a small, cramped space with a single bed and a window that looked out onto a parking lot. The sheets were stained, the carpet was threadbare, and the air was thick with the smell of stale cigarette smoke and cheap perfume. But it was a roof over their heads, a place to sleep, a moment of respite from the constant running. "This is nice, Mama," William had said, his voice small and tired. "I like it here." Ruth had felt a surge of love so powerful it almost broke her. He was so young, so innocent, so eager to please. He didn't know that they were running, that they were hiding, that their lives were a constant game of survival. He didn't know that the last of her money was gone, that she had no idea where their next meal was coming from, that the men in black cars were getting closer every day. "Go to sleep, baby," she had whispered. "I'll be right here." She had tucked him into bed, smoothing the covers over him, kissing his forehead. She had sat on the edge of the bed, watching him sleep, her heart aching with a grief she couldn't name. She had looked at his pale hair, his winter blue eyes, his small, trusting face, and she had made a silent promise to herself. She would protect him. She would keep him safe. She would find a way to give him the life he deserved. No matter what it cost her. The knock had come in the middle of the night, a sharp, insistent sound that had jolted Ruth awake. She had sat up, her heart pounding, her eyes scanning the darkness. The knock had come again, louder this time, more urgent. "Who is it?" she had called out, her voice trembling. "Open the door, Ruth," a voice had answered. "We know you're in there." It was a man's voice, cold and smooth, a voice that sent a chill down her spine. She didn't know who he was, didn't recognize the voice, but she knew in her bones that he was dangerous. She had heard that voice before, in her nightmares, in her fears, in the constant dread that had followed her for years. "William," she had whispered, shaking him awake. "William, get up. We have to go." He had woken up, disoriented, confused. "Mama, what's wrong?" "Sure," she had said, pressing a finger to her lips. "Don't make a sound. We have to be quiet." She had grabbed his hand and led him to the window, pushing it open, climbing out into the night. The ground had been hard and cold beneath her feet, but she hadn't felt it, hadn't felt anything but the terror that drove her forward. They had run into the darkness, the motel disappearing behind them, the man's voice fading into the distance. Ruth had run until her lungs burned and her legs gave out, and then she had collapsed against a tree, her body shaking with exhaustion and fear. "Mama, I'm scared," William had whispered, his voice small and trembling. Ruth had pulled him close, her arms wrapped around him, her heart aching with love and fear. "I know, baby," she had said. "I know you're scared. But we are going to be okay. We are going to find a place where they can't hurt us. I promise." She had made that promise so many times, to him and to herself. She had promised that they would be safe, that they would find a home, that the running would end. And she had believed it, had clung to that belief like a lifeline. But as she sat there in the darkness, her son in her arms, her heart pounding with fear, she had begun to wonder if the promise was empty. She had begun to wonder if there was any hope left, any future, any chance of peace. She had pushed the doubts aside, forced herself to stand up, forced herself to keep moving. She had taken William's hand and led him deeper into the darkness, and she had kept walking. It was the only thing she knew how to do. Chapter 7. The Kindness of Strangers. The years on the road had taught Ruth many things, but perhaps the most important lesson was the kindness of strangers. She had met people who had seen her and William and had chosen to help, who had given them food and shelter and hope when they had nothing else. There was the woman at the diner who had given her a job and a bed, who had looked at her with knowing eyes and asked no questions. She was a stout, cheerful woman named Betty, with a laugh that filled the room and a heart that was even bigger. She had taken Ruth in when she had nowhere else to go, had given her a place to sleep and a hot meal and a chance to earn a little money. "You look like you could use a friend," Betty had said, her eyes twinkling with understanding. "And I could use some help in the kitchen. What do you say?" Ruth had said yes, had worked in that diner for 3 months, had saved enough money to move on. She had never forgotten Betty's kindness, the way she had asked no questions, the way she had trusted Ruth without reservation. There was the old man on the bus who had given her his seat and his smile and his blessing. He was a frail, stooped man with a white beard and eyes that sparkled with mischief. He had seen Ruth struggling with William, had seen the exhaustion in her eyes, and he had insisted that she take his seat. "A pretty young woman like you shouldn't be standing," he had said, his voice warm and gentle. "And a young man like this deserves a comfortable ride." He had told her stories during the long journey, stories of his youth, of his travels, of the people he had met along the way. He had made her laugh, had made her forget her troubles for a little while. And when they had parted ways, he had pressed a crumpled dollar bill into her hand. "Buy yourself something nice," he had said. "And remember, there's always kindness in the world. You just have to look for it." There was the family who had taken them in for a week, feeding them and clothing them and treating them like their own. They were a large, boisterous family, with 7 children and a house that was always overflowing with noise and laughter. They had found Ruth and William sleeping in a bus station, had invited them home, had given them a warm bed and a hot meal and a sense of belonging. "You're part of the family now," the mother had said, her arms wrapped around Ruth in a warm embrace. "As long as you need us, we are here for you." Ruth had wept that night, silent tears streaming down her face. She had been so alone for so long, had carried so much on her own, had forgotten what it felt like to be supported. The kindness of that family had reminded her that she was not alone, that there was still goodness in the world, that there were still people who cared. These moments of kindness had kept Ruth going, had reminded her that there was still goodness in the world, that there were still people who cared. They had given her hope when hope was hard to find, and she had clung to them like a lifeline. But the kindness of strangers was not always enough. It could not stop the men in black cars, could not erase the past, could not give her the future she dreamed of. It was a temporary respite, a moment of peace in a life that was defined by chaos and fear. And Ruth had learned to take what she could get. It was on a Greyhound bus, somewhere between Alabama and Mississippi, that Ruth had met the woman who would change everything. She was an old woman, her face lined with years of hard living, her eyes sharp and knowing. She had sat down next to Ruth and William, her bag stuffed into the overhead compartment, and she had smiled at them with a warmth that had taken Ruth by surprise. "Where are you headed?" the woman had asked, her voice gentle and kind. "Nowhere, really," Ruth had said, her voice cautious. "We are just traveling." The woman had nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "I see," she had said. "I've been there myself. Traveling, running, trying to find a place where the past doesn't follow you." Ruth had felt a chill run down her spine. The woman knew. She could see it in her eyes, the knowing, the understanding. She had been there herself, had been running from something, had been hiding from something. She had seen the same desperation in Ruth's eyes that she had once seen in her own. "I've heard about a place," the woman had said, her voice low and conspiratorial. "A small town in Mississippi called Willow Creek. It's a place where people can start over, where the past doesn't follow you, where you can be whoever you want to be." Ruth had listened, her heart pounding with hope. She had wanted to believe, wanted to trust, wanted to find a place where she could finally stop running. She had heard so many promises before, so many false hopes, so many roads that had led nowhere. But there was something different about this woman. Something in her eyes, in her voice, in the way she spoke. She was not selling a dream, she was sharing a truth. "Willow Creek," Ruth had repeated, the name tasting like hope on her tongue. "Willow Creek," the woman had confirmed. "Look for the church. The one with the white steeple. Tell them I sent you." Ruth had watched the woman leave the bus, her heart heavy with gratitude. She had no idea who the woman was, no idea why she had been so kind, no idea if she could trust her advice. But she had known, in her bones, that she had to try. She had looked down at William, at his pale hair and his winter blue eyes, at the face that was so much like his father's. She had felt a surge of love so powerful it almost broke her. This boy was her whole world, her reason for living, her only source of hope in a world that had given her nothing but pain. "We are going to Willow Creek," she had whispered. "We are going to find a home." The bus had rumbled on, carrying them toward an uncertain future. Ruth had held William close, her eyes fixed on the window, watching the landscape change. The familiar scenery of Alabama had given way to the rolling hills of Mississippi, the pine forests giving way to cotton fields, the small towns giving way to smaller towns. She had no idea what she would find in Willow Creek, no idea if the woman's advice was trustworthy, no idea if there was any hope left. But she had to believe. She had to hope. She had to keep moving forward. It was the only thing she knew how to do. Chapter 8. The Hunger. The hunger was a constant companion, a low, gnawing ache that never quite went away. Ruth had learned to ignore it, to push it down, to pretend that she wasn't hungry when her stomach was growling and her head was spinning. She had learned to survive on coffee and cigarettes, to stretch a single meal across an entire day, to make a little food go a long way. But William was young, too young to understand, too young to ignore the pangs of hunger that plague him. and Ruth had made sure that he never went to bed with an empty stomach. She had gone without food so that he could eat. She had given him the last of the bread, the last of the milk, the last of everything. She had watched him eat, her heart aching with love and guilt, and she had told herself that it was worth it. Because it was. It was worth every moment of hunger, every night of sleeplessness, every day of exhaustion. He was her son, her reason for living, her only source of hope. And she would do anything, absolutely anything, to protect him. The diner was a small, run-down place on the edge of town, the kind of place where the coffee was weak and the food was greasy and the only customers were truck drivers and drifters. Ruth had been working there for 3 weeks, washing dishes and waiting tables, earning just enough to pay for the motel room and the groceries. The owner, a gruff, tired man named Frank, had been kind to her. He had given her the job without asking questions, had paid her in cash, had turned a blind eye to her absences and her lies. He had known that she was running, that she was hiding, and he had never pushed her for the truth. "Ruth," he had said one evening, his voice low and serious, "I need to talk to you." She had felt a chill run down her spine. "What is it, Frank?" "There's a man asking questions," he had said. "He's been asking about you, about a woman with a child. He doesn't look like a cop, but he looks dangerous. I think you should leave." Ruth had felt her blood run cold. The men in black cars had found her. They were closing in, and there was nowhere left to run. "Thank you, Frank," she had said, her voice trembling. "Thank you for everything." She had packed her bags that very night, taken William from his bed, and fled into the darkness. She had no idea who the man was, no idea why he was looking for her, but she had known that she had to run. They had walked for hours, until her legs were burning and her feet were bleeding, until they had reached the edge of town and the road stretched out before them. She had looked down at William, at his tired face and his trusting eyes, and she had felt a surge of love that almost broke her. "Don't worry, baby," she had whispered. "We are going to find a home. I promise." The hunger had been worse than ever in those days. Ruth had barely enough money for a bus ticket, let alone food. She had gone days without eating, surviving on water and sheer determination. She had watched William eat scraps, had given him the last of everything, had told herself that it was worth it. But there were moments when the hunger was almost too much to bear, when her body was racked with pain and her mind was clouded with exhaustion. There were moments when she wondered if she could go on, if she had the strength to keep fighting, if there was any hope left. In those moments, she had looked at William, at his pale hair and his winter blue eyes, and she had found the strength to keep going. She had found the will to survive, the determination to protect him, the love that had carried her through every hardship. She had made a promise to herself, a promise that she would never give up, that she would never stop fighting, that she would find a way to give her son the life he deserved. It was a promise that had sustained her through the darkest nights, the hardest days, the moments when hope seemed lost. And it was a promise she intended to keep. Chapter 9. The Photograph. The photograph was Ruth's most precious possession, a worn and faded picture of a man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. It was the only thing she had of James, the only proof that he had existed, that the love had been real. She had carried it with her everywhere, tucked into her pocket, pressed against her heart. She had looked at it every night, tracing the lines of his face with her finger, trying to remember the sound of his voice, the warmth of his touch. She had closed her eyes and imagined him there with her, imagined his arms wrapped around her, imagined the life they could have had. William had asked about the photograph once, his curious eyes studying the face of the man he would never know. They had been sitting in a bus station, waiting for a ride, and William had noticed the photograph in her hand. "Who is that, Mama?" he had asked, his voice small and curious. Ruth had felt a surge of grief, a pain so sharp it took her breath away. She had looked at the photograph, at the face of the man she had loved, and she had felt the weight of all the years that had passed, all the dreams that had died, all the hopes that had been dashed. "That's your father," she had said, her voice soft and trembling. "He was a good man. A kind man. He loved us very much." "Where is he now?" William had asked. Ruth had shaken her head, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know, baby. I don't know where he is. But I know that he loved us, and that he would have stayed if he could." She had looked at William, at his pale hair and his winter blue eyes, at the face that was so much like his father's. She had felt a surge of love so powerful it almost broke her. This boy was the legacy of their love, the proof that it had been real, the hope that carried her through the darkest days. Will I ever meet him? William had asked. Ruth had hesitated, not knowing what to say. She wanted to tell him yes, wanted to promise that one day they would be together again, that James would come back and they would be a family. But she couldn't make that promise, couldn't give him false hope, couldn't set him up for disappointment. I don't know, baby, she had said finally. But I know that he loves you. And I know that he would be proud of the boy you're becoming. Ruth had made a promise to herself that night, a promise that she would never forget James, that she would never stop loving him, that she would make sure that William knew his father's memory. She had looked at the photograph, at the face of the man she had loved, and she had whispered, I'll keep him safe, James. I'll keep our son safe. I promise. The photograph had become a talisman, a symbol of everything she had lost and everything she still had. It had given her strength when she was weak, hope when she was despairing, love when she was alone. And it had reminded her that she was not alone, that she had been loved, that she was worthy of love. Chapter 10. The Preacher's Warning. The preacher was a tall, dignified man with kind eyes and a gentle voice. He had found Ruth on the steps of his church, her body shivering with cold, her eyes hollow with exhaustion. She had been sitting there for hours, unable to move, unable to think, unable to do anything but wait. He had taken her in, fed her, clothed her, listened to her story. He had asked no questions, offered no judgment, given nothing but compassion. He had seen the fear in her eyes, the desperation in her voice, and he had responded with kindness. Tell me what happened, he had said, his voice filled with compassion. Ruth had told him everything, the pregnancy, the exile, the running, the fear. She had told him about the men who were looking for her, the men who wanted to take her son. She had told him about her love for James, her faith in his return, her hope that one day they would be together again. The preacher had listened, his eyes filled with understanding. You are a brave woman, Ruth, he had said. You have given your son a great gift, the gift of love, of sacrifice, of hope. He had given her a warning that would change everything. There are men looking for you, he had said. They are powerful, dangerous. They will not stop until they find you and the boy. You need to leave, Ruth. You need to find a place where they cannot reach you. Ruth had felt her heart sink. She had known that the men were close, had felt their presence in the shadows, in the whispers, in the constant dread that followed her. But hearing it spoken aloud, hearing it confirmed, had made it real in a way that it hadn't been before. Where can I go? She had asked, her voice trembling. Where can I hide from them? The preacher had thought for a long moment, his brow furrowed with concentration. There's a town, he had said finally. A small town called Willow Creek. It's a place where people go to start over, where the past doesn't follow them. The people there are good people, kind people. They will help you. Ruth had felt a glimmer of hope, a flicker of light in the darkness. Willow Creek. The name had echoed in her mind, a promise of safety, of peace, of a new beginning. Willow Creek, she had repeated. How do I get there? The preacher had given her directions, had written down the name of a church, had told her to ask for the Reverend Thomas. He had given her money for a bus ticket, had packed her a bag of food, had sent her on her way with a blessing. Go with God, Ruth, he had said. And may he keep you safe. The letter had arrived the next day, slipped under the door of the preacher's rectory. It was a plain white envelope with no return address, no postmark, nothing to indicate where it had come from. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper, covered in typewritten words. We know you're in Willow Creek. We are coming. Leave now, or we'll take the boy. Ruth had read the letter over and over, her heart pounding with fear. She had no idea who had sent it, no idea how they had found her. But she had known that she had to run. She had packed her bags, taken William's hand, and fled into the night. Part 3. The Hunt. Chapter 11. The Men in Black Cars. Ruth had seen them for the first time on a Tuesday, 3 days after the preacher's warning. She had been walking back to the motel from the diner where she worked, William's small hand clasped tightly in hers, her mind churning with the terror of the letter that had been slipped under the preacher's door. The sun was sinking low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and blood orange, casting long shadows that stretched across the cracked pavement like the fingers of reaching hands. The air was thick with the smell of dust and diesel and the faint, sickly sweetness of decaying magnolia blossoms that had fallen from the trees and rotted in the gutters. She had noticed the car first because it was so out of place. Willow Creek was a town of rusted pickups and dented sedans, of vehicles held together with baling wire and prayer, of trucks that had seen better decades and cars that had been patched and repatched so many times that their original color was a distant memory. The car that was parked across the street from the motel was none of those things. It was a sleek black sedan, so shiny that it seemed to glow in the fading light, its surface reflecting the sky like a mirror, its chrome trim gleaming with an almost obscene perfection. Its engine was idling, a low, throaty purr that seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath her feet, a sound so smooth and powerful that it seemed to belong to a different world entirely. Its windows were tinted so dark that she couldn't see inside, couldn't see who was watching her from behind that impenetrable glass, couldn't see the faces of the men who had been hunting her for so long. She had felt a chill run down her spine, a primal fear that made her blood run cold and her heart stutter in her chest. She had stopped walking, her body frozen, her mind racing with the knowledge that she was being hunted, that they had found her, that there was nowhere left to run. The photograph of James seemed to burn in her pocket, a reminder of the danger that had followed her for years, the danger that had finally caught up with her. "William," she had whispered, her voice tight with panic. "Don't look back. Just keep walking." He had looked up at her, his pale blue eyes wide with confusion, his small face pinched with worry. He was so perceptive, so attuned to her moods, so quick to sense when something was wrong. He had learned to read her fear, to recognize the signs of danger, to trust her instincts without question. "Mama, what's wrong?" he had asked, his voice small and trembling. "Why are you scared? Is it the bad men again?" "Nothing, baby," she had said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Everything's fine. We just need to walk a little faster, that's all." She had quickened her pace, pulling him along, her heart pounding so loudly that she was certain the men in the car could hear it. She had not looked back, had not dared to look back, but she had felt the weight of their gaze, the pressure of their attention, the certainty that they were watching her every move. She had felt their eyes on her back, cold and calculating, like predators sizing up their prey. She had reached the motel room, her hands trembling so badly that she could barely fit the key into the lock. She had pushed William inside, slammed the door shut, and turned the deadbolt with a click that sounded deafeningly loud in the silence. She had drawn the curtains, pressing her back against the wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her body shaking with the force of her terror. "Mama, you're scaring me," William had said, his voice small and trembling, his eyes filling with tears. "Please don't be scared. Please. I don't like it when you're scared." Ruth had forced herself to breathe, to think, to focus. She had knelt down in front of him, her hands on his thin shoulders, her eyes searching his frightened face. She had seen the trust in his eyes, the unwavering faith that she would protect him, that she would keep him safe. And she had known, in that moment, that she had to be strong for him, that she could not let him see her fear. "I'm sorry, baby," she had said, her voice soft and steady. "I'm sorry I scared you. But we have to be very quiet now. We have to be very still. Can you do that for me? Can you be my brave little boy?" He had nodded, his face pale, his eyes still filled with tears. "I'll be brave, Mama. I promise." She had pulled him into a tight embrace, holding him close, feeling his small body tremble against hers. She had whispered reassurances into his hair, soft words of comfort that she wasn't sure she believed herself. And she had waited, her heart pounding, her ears straining for the sound of footsteps, the knock on the door, the end that she knew was coming. The men in the black car had stayed for 3 days. Ruth had watched them from behind the curtain, her heart pounding with fear, her body rigid with tension, her eyes never leaving the sleek black vehicle that sat across the street like a predator waiting to strike. They never got out of the car, never approached the motel, never did anything that could be called threatening. They simply sat there, their engine idling, their windows dark, their presence a constant reminder that she was being watched, that she was being hunted, that there was no escape. She had tried to figure out who they were, what they wanted, why they were following her. She had no answers, no clues, no way of knowing. All she knew was that they were dangerous, that they wanted to take her son, and that she had to get away. She had thought about James, about the letter he had sent, about the secret he had revealed. She had thought about the men who were hunting him, the men who wanted to use him for their own purposes. She had wondered if these were the same men, if they had found her because of him, if the danger that had chased him had finally caught up with her. She had no answers, only questions, and the questions were eating her alive. On the third night, Ruth had made a decision. She could not stay here, could not wait for them to make their move. She had to run, had to get away, had to find a place where they could not reach her. It was the only option, the only chance she had to protect her son. She had waited until the middle of the night, when the motel was silent and the men in the black car were least likely to be watching. She had packed their bags, stuffing their few belongings into a worn duffel bag. She had taken William's hand, her fingers trembling, her heart pounding with fear. "William," she had whispered, shaking him awake. "William, get up. We have to go." He had woken up, disoriented and confused, his eyes heavy with sleep. "Mama, where are we going? It's still dark outside."
"I'm tired."
"I know, baby," she had said, her voice soft and urgent. "But we have to go now. We have to be very quiet. Can you do that for me? Can you be quiet and brave?" He had nodded, his face pale, his eyes filled with trust. He had climbed out of bed, his small feet padding silently on the worn carpet. He had taken her hand, his fingers cold and trembling, and he had followed her to the window. Ruth had pushed the window open, the screen creaking in protest. She had climbed out first, her feet landing on the hard ground with a soft thud. She had reached up for William, lifting him through the window, cradling him in her arms. "Hold on to me, baby," she had whispered. "Don't let go. Whatever happens, don't let go." He had wrapped his arms around her neck, his small body pressed against hers. She had run, her legs pumping beneath her, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had run through the darkness, the motel disappearing behind them, the black car fading into the distance. She had not looked back, had not dared to look back. She had known that the men were following her, that they would catch her, that they would take her son. But she had also known that she could not let that happen. She would do anything, absolutely anything, to protect him. They had walked for hours, until the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon. Ruth's legs were burning, her feet were bleeding, and her arms ached from carrying William. But she had not stopped, had not slowed down, had not given in to the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her. She had found a small diner on the edge of a town she didn't recognize, a place that was just opening for the day. The lights were warm and inviting, the smell of coffee and bacon drifting out into the cold morning air. She had bought a cup of coffee with the last of her money, sitting in a booth in the corner, holding William in her lap. "Mama, I'm tired," William had said, his voice small and weary. "I want to go home." Ruth had kissed the top of his head, her heart aching with love and grief. "I know, baby. I know you're tired. But we are going to be okay. We are going to find a place where they can't hurt us. I promise." She had looked down at him, at his pale hair and his winter blue eyes, at the face that was so much like his father's. She had felt a surge of love so powerful it almost broke her. He was her whole world, her reason for living, her only source of hope in a world that had given her nothing but pain. She had thought about James, about the man she had loved, about the man who had left her. She had wondered if he was still alive, if he was still running, if he still thought about her. She had no answers, only questions, and the questions were a constant ache in her heart. But she had pushed the questions aside, had focused on the present, had done what she had to do. She had kept running, kept hiding, kept hoping. It was all she could do. Chapter 12. The Secret. The secret was the hardest thing Ruth had ever carried, a weight that pressed down on her like a physical burden, a truth that she had never told a single soul. It was the reason she was running, the reason she was hiding, the reason she had left her son in a stranger's care. It was a secret that had haunted her for years, a secret that had destroyed her life and the lives of everyone she loved. She had learned the truth in a letter that James had sent before he disappeared. It had arrived weeks after he had left, a battered envelope with a postmark from a city she had never heard of, a city called Nashville, Tennessee. She had opened it with trembling hands, her heart pounding with hope, her eyes scanning the words with desperate hunger. She had read it over and over, trying to understand, trying to make sense of the revelation that had shattered everything she thought she knew. "My dearest Ruth, I am sorry I left you. I am sorry I couldn't tell you the truth. But you need to know why I had to go, why I couldn't stay. There are men who are hunting me, men who want to use me for their own purposes. They are powerful, dangerous, and they will stop at nothing to get what they want. I have been running from them for years, and I will never stop running. Not until they are caught. But there is something else I need to tell you. Something I have never told anyone. The reason they are hunting me, the reason I can never go back, is that I know too much. I know about their secrets, their crimes, their plans. And I have evidence that could destroy them. I have hidden the evidence, Ruth. I have hidden it where no one will ever find it. But if something happens to me, you need to find it. You need to use it to protect yourself and our son. I love you, Ruth. I have always loved you, and I will always love you. I am sorry that I cannot be with you, cannot protect you, cannot give you the life you deserve. Yours always, James. Ruth had read the letter over and over, her heart pounding with fear, her mind racing with the implications of what James had written. She had no idea what the evidence was, no idea where it was hidden. All she knew was that James was in danger, that she was in danger, that their son was in danger. She had wanted to burn the letter, to forget it existed, to pretend that she had never seen it. But she couldn't. She had kept it, hidden it in the lining of her coat, carried it with her everywhere. It was a reminder of the truth, a reminder of the danger, a reminder of the love that had brought them together. She had never told anyone the truth. She had never trusted anyone enough. She had carried the burden alone, a weight that had grown heavier with each passing day. The secret had shaped every decision she had made, every step she had taken, every breath she had drawn. She had run because of the secret, hidden because of the secret, sacrificed everything because of the secret. It had consumed her life, destroyed her future, taken everything from her. And yet, she could not let it go. She could not forget the truth, could not ignore the danger, could not pretend that everything was fine. The secret was a part of her soul, a part of her very being. She had thought about James, about the man she had loved, about the man who had trusted her with his secret. She had wondered if he was still alive, if he was still running, if he still thought about her. She had no answers, only questions, and the questions were a constant ache in her heart. She had thought about William, about the son she had left behind, about the future she had given him. She had wondered if he was happy, if he was safe, if he would ever forgive her. She had no answers, only questions, and the questions were a constant ache in her heart. But she had pushed the questions aside, had focused on the present, had done what she had to do. She had kept running, kept hiding, kept hoping. It was all she could do. Chapter 13. The Father's Shadow. The shadow of James had followed Ruth everywhere, a constant presence that she could never escape. She saw him in William's eyes, heard him in William's voice, felt him in the warmth of her son's embrace. He was there, always there, a ghost that haunted her dreams and her waking hours. She had never stopped loving him, never stopped hoping that he would come back. She had searched for him, followed leads, asked questions. But she had never found him, never gotten any closer to the truth. She had begun to wonder if he was even alive, if he had been caught by the men who were hunting him, if he had been killed. The uncertainty was a constant ache, a wound that never quite healed. The dream had come to her in the middle of the night, a vision so vivid that she had woken up screaming. She had dreamed of James, of his face, of his voice. He was standing in a field, the sun behind him, his arms outstretched. "Come to me, Ruth," he had said. "Come to me and I will protect you." She had run toward him, her heart pounding with hope. But before she could reach him, he had vanished, swallowed by the darkness. She had called his name, over and over, but there had been no answer. She had woken up in tears, her body shaking, her heart aching. She had known, in that moment, that he was gone, that she would never see him again. She had lain in the darkness, her arms wrapped around herself, her body trembling with grief. She had thought about James, about the love they had shared, about the future they had dreamed of. She had thought about William, about the son they had created, about the family they had never been able to be. She had wept, silent tears streaming down her face, her heart aching with a grief that seemed to have no bottom. She had wept for James, for William, for herself. She had wept for the life she had lost, the life she had never had, the life she would never have. But in the morning, she had woken up with a new resolve. She had looked at William, at his pale hair and his winter blue eyes, and she had known that she would do anything, absolutely anything, to protect him. She would not give up. She would not give in. She would keep fighting, keep running, keep hoping. She would be the mother he deserved. Chapter 14. The Nightmare. The nightmare was always the same. Ruth would be running through a dark forest, the trees closing in around her, the sound of footsteps behind her. She would look back and see the men in black cars, their faces twisted with anger, their hands reaching out to grab her. She would run faster, faster, but they would always catch her. They would grab her arms, hold her down, take William from her. She would scream, beg, plead, but they would not listen. They would take him, carry him away, and she would be left alone in the darkness. She would wake up drenched in sweat, her heart pounding, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She would reach for William, feel his warmth, his presence, and she would cling to him, grateful that he was still there. The fear was a constant companion, a presence that never left her. She was afraid of the men, afraid of what they would do, afraid of what they would take from her. She was afraid of the future, afraid of the unknown, afraid of the life that lay ahead. But she was also afraid of herself, of her own weakness, her own doubts, her own failures. She was afraid that she would not be strong enough, brave enough, wise enough to protect her son. She had learned to live with the fear, to push it down, to hide it behind a mask of bravery. But it was always there, always lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when she would let her guard down. One night, the nightmare had been so vivid that she had woken up screaming. William had been beside her, his small body trembling with fear, his eyes wide with confusion. "Mama, what's wrong?" he had asked. "Why are you screaming? What happened?" Ruth had pulled him into her arms, holding him close, her body shaking with sobs. "I'm sorry, baby," she had whispered. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to scare you." He had wrapped his small arms around her, his voice soft and comforting. "It's okay, Mama. I'm here. I'll protect you. I won't let anyone hurt you." Ruth had felt a surge of love so powerful it almost broke her. He was so young, so innocent, so eager to protect her. He didn't understand that she was supposed to protect him, that she was supposed to keep him safe, that she was supposed to be the strong one. She had held him close, her heart aching with love and grief. She had known, in that moment, that she could not keep running forever. She had to find a way to protect him, to give him a chance, to give him a future. She had made a decision. Chapter 15. The Sheriff's Visit. The sheriff had come to the motel on a Tuesday afternoon, his face grim, his eyes hard. He was a large man, with a thick neck and a neatly trimmed mustache, and he had a presence that filled the room. He wore a crisp uniform, his badge gleaming on his chest, and he carried himself with the authority of a man who was used to being obeyed. "Ruth Harrison?" he had asked, his voice flat and official. Ruth had nodded, her heart pounding with fear. "Yes, sir. That's me." "I need to ask you some questions," he had said. "There have been reports of a woman traveling with a child, a woman who matches your description. I need to know who you are, where you're from, where you're going." Ruth had felt a chill run down her spine. The sheriff knew. The men in black cars had told him. They were closing in, and there was nowhere left to run. "I don't know what you're talking about," she had said, her voice trembling. "I'm just a traveler, passing through. I haven't done anything wrong." The sheriff had stuttered her, his eyes cold and calculating. "I've been told that you're a danger to yourself and others," he had said. "I've been told that you're unstable, that you're a threat to the child." Ruth had felt a surge of anger, hot and blinding. "That's a lie," she had said. "I'm not a threat to anyone. I'm just trying to protect my son." The sheriff had shaken his head. "I'm going to have to take the boy," he had said. "It's for his own safety. You're not fit to be a mother." Ruth had run. She had grabbed William, pushed past the sheriff, and run out of the motel. She had run through the streets, her legs burning, her heart pounding, until she had reached the edge of town. She had not looked back, had not dared to look back. She had known that the sheriff was following her, that he would catch her, that he would take her son. But she had also known that she could not let that happen. She would do anything, absolutely anything, to protect her son. She had found shelter in an abandoned barn on the outskirts of town. It was cold and drafty, the roof leaking, the floor covered in hay and dust. But it was a place to hide, a place to catch her breath, a place to think. She had held William close, her arms wrapped around him, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. She had no idea where to go, no idea what to do. All she knew was that she had to keep running, keep hiding, keep hoping. "Don't worry, baby," she had whispered. "We are going to be okay. I promise." He had looked up at her, his eyes filled with trust. "I know, Mama. I know we are going to be okay." Ruth had felt a surge of love so powerful it almost broke her. He was so young, so innocent, so full of faith. He believed in her, trusted her, loved her, and she could not let him down. She had made a decision. She would find a way to protect him, to give him a chance, to give him a future. She would do whatever it took, no matter the cost. Part 4, The Choice. Chapter 16, The Weight of Motherhood. The weight of motherhood was a burden that Ruth carried every day, a responsibility that pressed down on her like a physical weight, heavy and unrelenting. She had never known that love could be so fierce, so consuming, so all-encompassing. She had never known that fear could be so paralyzing, so constant, so relentless. She had never known that the simple act of loving another person could be both the greatest joy and the greatest burden a human being could bear. She had given up everything for her son, her family, her home, her future. She had sacrificed her own happiness, her own safety, her own dreams. She had done it willingly, gladly, without hesitation. There had never been a moment of doubt, a moment of regret, a moment when she had wished she had made a different choice. He was her son, her flesh and blood, her reason for living. And she would have given up everything 100 times over if it meant keeping him safe. But there were days when the weight was almost too much to bear, when the exhaustion and the fear and the loneliness threatened to overwhelm her. There were days when she wondered if she was strong enough, brave enough, good enough to be a mother. There were days when she looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, a woman who had been broken by the weight of her circumstances, a woman who had lost herself in the struggle to protect her child. The doubt had crept in slowly, like a fog rolling in from the sea. It had started with small things, a missed meal, a sleepless night, a moment of weakness. It had grown into a constant presence, a voice that whispered in her ear, telling her that she was failing, that she was not enough, that she would never be enough. She had tried to push the doubt away, to ignore it, to pretend that it didn't exist. But it was always there, always waiting, always ready to pull her down. One night, sitting in the abandoned barn, watching William sleep, she had broken down. She had wept, silent tears streaming down her face, her body shaking with grief. She had held the photograph of James in her hands and she had whispered to him, to the man she had loved, to the man who had left her. "James, I can't do this alone," she had said. "I'm not strong enough. I'm not brave enough. I don't know how to keep him safe." But there had been no answer, no comfort, no relief. She had been alone, as she had always been alone, and she had known that she had to find the strength within herself. She had looked at William, at his pale hair and his winter blue eyes, at the face that was so much like his father's. He was so small, so fragile, so utterly dependent on her. He had no one else, no one to turn to, no one to protect him. She was all he had. And she could not let him down. In the morning, Ruth had woken up with a new resolve. She had looked at William, at his pale hair and his winter blue eyes, and she had known that she would do anything, absolutely anything, to protect him. She would not give up. She would not give in. She would keep fighting, keep running, keep hoping. She would be the mother he deserved. She had packed their few belongings, taken William's hand, and walked out of the barn. She had no idea where she was going, no idea what she would do next. All she knew was that she had to keep moving, keep fighting, keep hoping. The sun was rising over the horizon, casting golden light across the fields. It was a new day, a new beginning, a new chance. And Ruth was determined to make the most of it. The days that followed were a blur of exhaustion and fear. Ruth had walked for miles, carrying William when he was too tired to walk, sleeping in ditches and under bridges when there was nowhere else to go. She had begged for food, taken odd jobs, done whatever was necessary to survive. She had thought about the woman on the Greyhound, about the town of Willow Creek, about the church with the white steeple. She had thought about the promise of safety, of peace, of a new beginning. It had become a beacon of hope, a light in the darkness, a reason to keep going. She had told William about Willow Creek, had painted a picture of a place where they could finally stop running, where they could find a home, where they could be happy. "It's a special place, baby," she had said. "A place where people can start over. A place where we can be safe." William had looked at her with his trusting eyes, his small face filled with hope. "Will we have a house, Mama? Will we have a garden? Will I have a room of my own?" Ruth had felt a surge of love so powerful it almost broke her. "Yes, baby," she had said. "We'll have all of that. I promise." But as the days turned into weeks, the hope began to fade. Ruth had grown weaker, more exhausted, more desperate. She had not been able to find work, had not been able to earn enough money for a bus ticket. She had been forced to walk, to sleep rough, to survive on scraps. She had begun to wonder if she would ever make it to Willow Creek, if the promise of a new beginning was just a dream, if there was any hope left at all. And then, one night, lying in a ditch on the side of the road, she had made a decision. She could not keep going like this. She was running out of strength, running out of time, running out of hope. She had to find a way to protect William, to give him a chance, to give him a future. She had to let him go. The decision had been made months ago, but it had taken Ruth this long to accept it. She had known that she could not keep running, that she could not keep hiding, that she could not keep William safe on her own. She had known that the only way to protect her son was to give him up, to let him go. She had thought about the woman on the Greyhound, about the preacher, about the kindness of strangers. She had thought about the town of Willow Creek, about the people who lived there, about the church with the white steeple. She had made her decision. Chapter 17. The Greyhound Ticket. The Greyhound ticket was the most expensive thing Ruth had ever bought, a piece of paper that had cost her almost everything she had. She had stood in line at the bus station, her hands trembling, her heart pounding, and she had handed over the money with a prayer on her lips. 2 tickets, she had said. 1 adult, 1 child. The ticket agent had looked at her, his eyes lingering on William, and Ruth had felt a chill run down her spine. She had known that he was judging her, that he was wondering why a woman with a child was traveling alone, that he was seeing the desperation in her eyes. But she had also known that she didn't care. She would do whatever it took to protect her son. The journey had been long and hard, a blur of endless roads and endless nights. Ruth had held William close, her arms wrapped around him, her heart aching with love and fear. She had watched the landscape change, the familiar scenery of Mississippi giving way to the unknown. She had not known where they were going, where they would end up. All she knew was that they had to keep moving, keep running, keep hoping. The hope was the only thing that kept her going, a fragile, flickering light in the darkness. She hoped that James would come back, that they would be together, that everything would work out in the end. She hoped that William would have a better life, a life filled with love and joy and happiness. She hoped that one day, the running would be over. The bus had pulled into Willow Creek in the early morning, the sky still dark, the air cold and biting. Ruth had stepped off the bus, William's hand in hers, and looked around at the town that would become her son's home. It was small, smaller than she had expected, a cluster of buildings that seemed to have been forgotten by time. There was a grocery store with a faded sign, a diner with a flickering neon sign that promised good eats, a barber shop with a red and white pole that hadn't been painted in years, and a church with a white clapboard steeple that rose above the treetops like a silent prayer. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, where secrets were hard to keep, where a woman with a child and no husband would be noticed. But it was also the kind of place where people could start over, where the past didn't follow you, where you could be whoever you wanted to be. She had walked through the streets, William's hand in hers, her heart pounding with fear and hope. She had seen the people, the black men and women going about their business, the children playing in the streets. She had seen the way they looked at her, a white woman with a white child, an anomaly, an outsider. She had known, in that moment, that she could not stay. She could not bring her son here, could not expose him to the prejudice and discrimination that she knew he would face. She could not force him to live in a world that would hate him simply because of the color of his skin. She had made her choice. She would leave him here, in this town, with these people. She would trust that they would take care of him, that they would give him the chance she could never give him. Chapter 18. The Last Night. The last night had been the hardest night of Ruth's life. She had known what she had to do, had known it for weeks, and she had been dreading it with every fiber of her being. She had held William close, his small body warm against hers, and she had wept. "I'm sorry, baby," she had whispered. "I'm so sorry." He had looked up at her, his eyes filled with trust, and she had felt her heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. "Why are you crying, Mama?" he had asked, his voice small and worried. She had forced a smile, a brave smile, a smile that hid the pain and the fear and the grief. "I'm not crying, baby. I'm just tired." He had reached up and touched her face, his small hand soft against her cheek. "Don't be sad, Mama. I'll take care of you. I'll be brave for you." Ruth had felt a surge of love so powerful it almost broke her. He was so young, so innocent, so eager to protect her. He didn't understand that she was supposed to protect him, that she was supposed to keep him safe, that she was supposed to be the strong one. She had held him close, her heart aching with love and grief. She had known, in that moment, that she could not keep running forever. She had to find a way to protect him, to give him a chance, to give him a future. She had made her decision. The decision had been made months ago, but it had taken Ruth this long to accept it. She had known that she could not keep running, that she could not keep hiding, that she could not keep William safe on her own. She had known that the only way to protect her son was to give him up, to let him go. She had thought about the woman on the greyhound, about the preacher, about the kindness of strangers. She had thought about the town of Willow Creek, about the people who lived there, about the church with the white steeple. She had made her decision. Ruth had made a promise to herself that night, a promise that she would come back for William, that she would find a way to be with him again, that she would never stop loving him. "I'll come back," she had whispered. "I don't know how, but I'll come back. I promise." She had held him close, memorizing the feel of him, the warmth of him, the love of him. She had kissed his forehead, his cheeks, his nose. She had told him that she loved him, that she would always love him, that nothing would ever change that. And then she had let him go. Chapter 19. The Forest. The forest was dark and forbidding, the trees looming like silent sentinels, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Ruth had led William into the forest, her heart pounding with fear, her mind racing with the knowledge of what she was about to do. "Mama, I don't like this," William had said, his voice small and frightened. "Can we go back? Please?" Ruth had knelt down in front of him, her hands on his shoulders, her eyes searching his face. "I know, baby. I know you don't like it. But I need you to be brave for me. I need you to be the bravest little boy in the whole world." He had looked at her, his eyes filled with trust, and she had felt her heart shatter. "Can you do that for me?" she had asked. "Can you be brave?" He had nodded, his face pale, his eyes filled with tears. "I'll be brave, Mama. I promise." Ruth had pulled him into a fierce embrace, her body shaking with silent sobs. She had held him for what felt like forever, trying to memorize the feel of him, the warmth of him, the love of him. "I have to go away for a while," she had said, forcing the words out. "I have to go away, and you need to stay here." "No, Mama. Don't leave me. Please don't leave me." She had pressed a kiss to his forehead, her lips cold and chapped. "You stay here, and someone will find you. Someone will take care of you. You're a good boy, William. A good, brave boy. Remember that. Remember me." She had stood up and run. She had run into the forest, her thin coat flapping behind her like the wings of a wounded bird, and she had not looked back. Chapter 20. The Abandonment. The abandonment was the hardest thing Ruth had ever done, a choice that had torn her apart and left her hollow. She had run until her lungs burned and her legs gave out, and then she had collapsed against the trunk of a pine tree and wept. She had wept for the life she had lost, for the child she had left behind, for the future she would never have. She had wept for the mother she had been and the mother she could not be. When the tears were gone, she had stood up, wiped her face, and begun to walk. She had no idea where she was going, no idea what she would do next. All she knew was that she had done the only thing she could do. She had given her son a chance. Part 5. The Aftermath. Chapter 21. The Woman Who Watched. Ruth had not left Willow Creek. She had told herself that she would, had planned to catch the next bus out of town, had even walked to the depot with her meager belongings stuffed into her worn duffel bag. But when she had stood at the ticket window, the money clutched in her trembling hand, she had found that she could not do it. She could not leave. She could not abandon her son a second time. She could not walk away from the only thing that mattered in her life. She had stayed, hidden in the shadows, watching from a distance. She had found a small room to rent on the outskirts of town, a tiny space with a bed and a chair and nothing else. The walls were thin, the roof leaked when it rained, and the landlord was a surly man who asked no questions as long as she paid her rent on time. It was not much, but it was enough. It was a place to hide, a place to wait, a place to watch. And she had watched. Every day, she had watched. She had positioned herself where she could see the house on Sycamore Street, where she could observe the comings and goings of the Thomas family. She had watched from behind trees, from the windows of the diner where she worked, from the shadows of the church across the street. She had watched William grow, had watched him laugh, had watched him play, had watched him become part of a family that was not hers. She had seen him taken in by the Thomases, had seen the kindness in Sarah's eyes, the warmth in the Reverend smile. She had seen him given a new name, a new life, a new identity. She had seen him accepted, loved, cherished. She had seen him thrive. And she had told herself that she was happy for him, that she was glad he had found a home, that she had made the right choice. But the watching had been torture, a constant reminder of what she had lost, what she had given up, what she would never have. Every smile on William's face was a knife in her heart. Every laugh that escaped his lips was a reminder that she was not the one making him happy. Every step he took toward his new family was a step away from her. She had watched him on his first day of school, had seen the fear in his eyes, the uncertainty, the loneliness. She had wanted to run to him, to wrap her arms around him, to tell him that everything would be okay. But she had not. She had stayed hidden, watching from a distance, her heart breaking with every tear that fell from his eyes. She had watched him make friends, had watched him learn, had watched him grow. She had seen the fire in his eyes, the determination, the hunger for something more. She had seen the boy she had raised become a man who would one day change the world. And she had been proud of him, so proud that it hurt. The years had passed, one after another, a blur of seasons and holidays and milestones that she had witnessed from a distance. She had watched William become a teenager, had watched him excel in school, had watched him discover his passion for justice. She had watched him argue with his friends, defend his beliefs, stand up for what was right. She had watched him become the person she had always known he could be. She had also watched him struggle. She had seen the prejudice he faced, the discrimination, the cruelty. She had seen the way people looked at him, the way they whispered about him, the way they treated him as an outsider. She had wanted to protect him, to shield him from the pain, to take it all away. But she had known that she could not. She had known that he had to face it on his own, that he had to find his own strength, that he had to become his own man. She had watched him leave for Howard University, had seen the excitement in his eyes, the hope, the determination. She had watched him go, knowing that she would not see him again for years, knowing that he was building a life that did not include her. And she had told herself that it was what she wanted, what she had always wanted, what she had sacrificed everything for. But the watching had taken its toll. It had left her hollow, empty, consumed by a grief that seemed to have no bottom. She had become a ghost, a shadow of the woman she had once been, a shell of a person who existed only to observe the life she could not live. She had stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped caring. She had gone through the motions of living, but her heart was not in it. Her heart was with William, always with William, forever with William. She had thought about reaching out, about finding a way to contact him, about telling him the truth. But she had known that she could not. She had known that the men were still out there, that they were still hunting her, that they would never stop. She had known that the only way to keep him safe was to stay away. And so she had stayed away, watching from a distance, her heart breaking with every passing day. Chapter 22. The Longing. The longing was a constant ache, a wound that never healed, a pain that never faded. Ruth had longed for her son, had yearned for him, had dreamed of him. She had thought about him every day, every hour, every minute. He was the first thought in her mind when she woke up in the morning and the last thought before she fell asleep at night. She had wondered if he was happy, if he was safe, if he thought about her. She had wondered if he missed her, if he loved her, if he would ever forgive her. She had wondered if he remembered her at all, if the memories of their time together had faded, if he had replaced her with the family that had taken him in. She had no answers, no way of knowing, no way of reaching out. She had thought about reaching out, about finding a way to contact him, about telling him the truth. She had imagined their reunion 1,000 times, had rehearsed the words she would say, had dreamed of the moment when she would finally hold him in her arms again. But she had known that she could not. She had known that the men were still out there, that they were still hunting her, that they would never stop. She had known that the only way to keep him safe was to stay away. And so she had stayed away, the longing consuming her from the inside out. She had thought about James, too, about the man she had loved, about the man who had left her. She had wondered if he was still alive, if he was still running, if he still thought about her. She had wondered if he had found a way to stop running, if he had found peace, if he had found happiness. She had no answers, only questions, and the questions were a constant ache in her heart. She had looked at the photograph of James, the worn and faded picture that she had carried with her for so many years. She had traced the lines of his face with her finger, trying to remember the sound of his voice, the warmth of his touch. She had closed her eyes and imagined him there with her, imagined his arms wrapped around her, imagined the life they could have had. But the imagination was not enough. It could not fill the void, could not ease the pain, could not bring him back. She had thought about the letter he had sent, the letter that had revealed the secret, the letter that had changed everything. She had thought about the evidence he had hidden, the evidence that could destroy the men who were hunting them. She had wondered if she should try to find it, if it would make a difference, if it would change anything. But she had no idea where it was, no idea how to find it, no idea if it even existed anymore. The secret was a burden she had carried alone for so long that she had begun to doubt its reality. And so she had let it go, had buried it deep within herself, had tried to forget that it ever existed. But it was always there, always lurking just beneath the surface, always reminding her of the danger that had destroyed her life. Chapter 23. The Letter Never Sent. Ruth had written William a letter, a long, tear-stained letter filled with all the words she had never been able to say. She had spent weeks on it, writing and rewriting, pouring her heart out onto the page. She had told him about James, about her love for him, about the sacrifice she had made. She had told him about the years on the run, the constant fear, the endless exhaustion. She had told him about the choice she had made, the choice to leave him in Willow Creek, the choice to give him a chance. She had told him that she loved him, that she had always loved him, that she would always love him. She had told him that she was proud of him, that she had watched him from afar, that she had seen him become the man she had always known he could be. She had told him that she was sorry, so sorry, for everything. She had never sent the letter. She had kept it, hidden it in the lining of her coat, carried it with her everywhere. It was a reminder of the love she had lost, the love she had given up, the love she would never have. She had read the letter over and over, her heart aching with grief. She had imagined William reading it, imagined him understanding, imagined him forgiving her. But she had never had the courage to send it. She had been too afraid of what he would think, too afraid of what he would feel, too afraid of what the men would do if they found out. She had kept the letter hidden, kept the secret buried, kept the love locked away in her heart. The letter had become a symbol of everything she had lost, everything she had given up, everything she could never have. It was a testament to her love for her son, a testament to her sacrifice, a testament to the pain she had endured. She had often wondered if she should send it, if she should take the risk, if she should finally tell him the truth. She had imagined the moment when he would receive it, the moment when he would read it, the moment when he would finally understand. But she had never had the courage. She had always pulled back at the last moment, always convinced herself that it was not the right time, always told herself that she would do it tomorrow. And tomorrow had never come. Chapter 24. The Reckoning. The reckoning had come on a cold winter night, years after Ruth had left William in Willow Creek. She had been living in a small town in Louisiana, working at a diner, keeping her head down, staying out of sight. She had been there for 3 years, longer than she had stayed anywhere since she had started running. She had begun to hope, tentatively, that the running was finally over. But the reckoning had come, as it always did, when she least expected it. She had heard the knock on the door, a sharp, insistent sound that had jolted her awake. She had sat up, her heart pounding, her eyes scanning the darkness. The knock had come again, louder this time, more urgent. She had opened the door, and there he was. James. He was older, his face lined with years of hardship, his hair streaked with grey. He was thinner than she remembered, his clothes worn and threadbare, his eyes haunted by the ghosts of the past. But he was alive. He was here. He had come back. "Ruth," he had said, his voice soft and trembling. "I am sorry. I'm so sorry." She had fallen into his arms, her body shaking with sobs. She had held him, clung to him, refused to let go. She had thought she would never see him again, had accepted that he was gone, had tried to move on with her life. And now he was here, in her arms, as if no time had passed at all. "James," she had whispered, "I thought you were dead. I thought I would never see you again." He had held her, his arms wrapped around her, his body shaking with silent sobs. "I am sorry, Ruth. I'm so sorry. I should have come back for you. I should have protected you." She had looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. She had seen the pain in his eyes, the regret, the love. She had known, in that moment, that he had suffered as much as she had, that he had been running just as long, that he had never stopped loving her. "James, I have so much to tell you," she had said. "So much has happened. So much has changed." He had nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "I know," he had said. "I know everything. I've been watching, just like you. I know about William. I know about the Thomases. I know about everything." He had taken her hand and led her inside, sat her down, and told her everything. James had told her about the men who had hunted him, the secrets he had uncovered, the evidence he had hidden. He had told her about his years on the run, his constant fear, his desperate hope that one day he would see her again. He had told her about the evidence, the proof that could destroy the men who had destroyed their lives. "I've been hiding it all these years," he had said. "I've been waiting for the right moment to use it. And I think that moment is finally here." He had told her about William, about the son he had never known, about the family he had never been able to have. He had told her that he had been watching William, just like she had, that he had seen him grow and thrive, that he was proud of the man he had become. "He's a good boy, Ruth," James had said. "He's a good man. He's going to do great things." Ruth had felt a surge of love and pride and grief. "He's our son," she had said. "He's our son, and we couldn't protect him. We had to let him go." James had nodded, his eyes filled with tears. "I know," he had said. "I know. But he's going to be okay. He's going to be more than okay. He's going to be a hero." Chapter 25. The Forgiveness. The forgiveness had come slowly, like the first light of dawn after a long night. Ruth had spent years blaming herself, hating herself, punishing herself for the choice she had made. She had believed that she was a failure, a monster, a mother who had abandoned her child. She had believed that she was unworthy of love, unworthy of forgiveness, unworthy of happiness. But James had helped her see the truth. He had helped her understand that she had done the only thing she could do, that she had made the only choice she could make, that she had given her son a chance. "You saved him, Ruth," James had said. "You saved his life. You gave him a future. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's something to be proud of." Ruth had wept, her body shaking with the force of her grief and relief. She had held James, clung to him, refused to let go. "I don't know if I can ever forgive myself," she had said. "I don't know if I can ever forgive myself for leaving him." James had held her, his arms wrapped around her, his voice soft and comforting. "You don't have to forgive yourself right away," he had said. "But you have to start trying. You have to start believing that you deserve forgiveness. Because you do, Ruth. You deserve it more than anyone I know." Ruth had looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. "James, I'm so sorry," she had said. "I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry for the years we lost. I'm sorry for the pain I caused. I'm sorry for the life we could have had." James had shaken his head, his eyes filled with love. "You don't have to be sorry," he had said. "None of this was your fault. We were both victims of circumstances beyond our control. But we are together now. And that's all that matters." She had looked at him, at the man she had loved, the man she had lost, the man she had found again. And she had known that she still loved him, that she had never stopped loving him, that she would always love him. "James," she had said, "I love you. I never stopped loving you. I will always love you." He had pulled her into his arms, his voice soft and trembling. "I love you too, Ruth. I never stopped loving you. I will always love you." They had held each other, two broken people who had finally found their way back to each other. They had talked for hours, sharing their stories, their pain, their hopes. They had made plans for the future, plans to find the evidence, plans to stop the men, plans to finally be free. And Ruth had felt, for the first time in years, a glimmer of hope. The days that followed had been a whirlwind of activity. James had shown her the evidence, the proof that could destroy the men who had destroyed their lives. He had hidden it in a safe deposit box, in a bank in a town she had never heard of. He had been waiting for the right moment to use it, and that moment had finally come. They had worked together, planning and strategizing. They had contacted a lawyer, a man James trusted, a man who would help them bring the men to justice. They had prepared their case, gathered their evidence, built their argument. And then they had waited. The trial had been long and grueling, a battle that had tested their strength and their resolve. The men had fought back, using every tactic in their arsenal to discredit James and Ruth, to destroy their evidence, to silence them forever. But James and Ruth had refused to give up. They had fought back, had stood their ground, had refused to be silenced. And in the end, they had won. The men had been convicted, sentenced to prison, stripped of their power. The evidence had been made public, exposing their crimes, destroying their reputations, ending their reign of terror. Ruth had stood in the courtroom, her hand in James's, and she had felt a sense of peace that she had never felt before. The running was finally over. The hiding was finally over. The fear was finally over. She had looked at James, at the man she loved, and she had known that they could finally have the life they had always dreamed of. But there was still one thing missing. One thing that would make everything complete. Epilogue. The photograph revisited. Years later, Ruth sat in the small church in Willow Creek, the same church where she had left her son all those years ago. The sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the worn wooden pews. The air was still, peaceful, filled with the scent of old wood and candle wax. She was an old woman now, her hair white, her face lined with the marks of a long and eventful life. But her eyes still held the same fire, the same determination, the same love that had carried her through all those years. She had come back to Willow Creek to see William, to finally tell him the truth, to ask for his forgiveness. She had waited so long, had carried the burden for so many years. And now, finally, she was ready. She had watched him walk into the church, had seen him take his seat in the front row. He was a man now, tall and strong, his eyes filled with the same fire that had burned in her heart for so many years. He was a lawyer, a champion for justice, a voice for the voiceless. He was everything she had always known he could be. She had felt a surge of love so powerful it almost broke her. This was her son, her flesh and blood, the child she had sacrificed everything for. And she was so proud of him, so proud of the man he had become. She had stood up, walked to the front of the church, and taken a seat beside him. He had looked at her, his eyes filled with curiosity, and she had smiled. "Hello, William," she had said. "My name is Ruth. I'm your mother." William had stared at her, his eyes wide with shock, his face pale. He had opened his mouth to speak, but no words had come out. He had looked at her, at the woman who had abandoned him all those years ago, and he had not known what to say. "I know you have questions," Ruth had said. "I know you're angry. I know you're confused. And I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to understand. But I need you to know the truth. I need you to know why I left." She had told him everything. The pregnancy, the exile, the running, the fear. She had told him about James, about the love they had shared, about the man who had left her. She had told him about the men who had hunted them, the secret that had destroyed their lives. She had told him about the choice she had made, the choice to leave him in Willow Creek, the choice to give him a chance. She had told him that she had watched him from afar, that she had seen him grow and thrive, that she was proud of the man he had become. She had told him that she loved him, that she had always loved him, that she would always love him. William had listened, his eyes filled with tears. He had been silent for a long time, processing everything she had said. And then he had spoken. "All these years," he had said, his voice soft and trembling. "All these years, I wondered about you. I wondered who you were, why you left, if you ever thought about me. I wondered if you loved me. And now I know." Ruth had felt a surge of hope, a flicker of light in the darkness. "I do love you, William," she had said. "I have always loved you. And I am so sorry for the pain I caused." William had reached out and taken her hand. "You gave me a chance," he had said. "You gave me a home. You gave me a family. You gave me a future. And I am grateful for that." Ruth had felt tears stream down her face. She had been so afraid, so certain that he would reject her, that he would hate her, that he would never forgive her. But he had not. He had accepted her, understood her, forgiven her. "Thank you," she had whispered. "Thank you for giving me a chance." William had smiled, a warm, genuine smile that had lit up his face. "You're my mother," he had said. "You gave me life. You gave me everything. And I am proud to be your son." The photograph that Ruth had carried with her for so many years, the worn and faded picture of a man with kind eyes and a gentle smile, had finally found its home. She had given it to William, had told him about James, had given him the only thing she had ever had of his father. "This is your father," she had said. "He was a good man. A kind man. He loved you very much. William had looked at the photograph, his eyes filled with tears. I wish I could have known him, he had said. I wish he could have been part of my life. Ruth had nodded, her heart aching with grief. I wish that too, she had said. But I know that he loved you. And I know that he would be proud of you. She had looked at her son, at the man he had become, and she had felt a profound sense of peace. She had carried the burden for so long, had run for so many years, had hidden from the world for so long. But now, finally, it was over. She had found her son. She had told him the truth. She had asked for his forgiveness. And he had given it. She had looked at the photograph, at the face of the man she had loved, and she had whispered, I did it, James. I found him. I told him the truth. He knows who we are. He knows that we loved him. She had tucked the photograph back into her pocket, her heart overflowing with love and gratitude. She had found her son, and she had found peace. And that was all anyone could ask. The end. Thank you for allowing me to tell this story. Before I White is the prequel to Cos I White, exploring Ruth's journey from a privileged young woman to a desperate mother making the ultimate sacrifice. It answers the questions left unanswered in the original book and adds depth and richness to the world of Willow Creek.